Welcome to Conversations with Writers. I'm Andy. I'm a writer, and this is an educational YouTube series meant to catalog writing strategies and philosophies through conversations with other writers. Amanda Passmore-Ott graduated Vermont College in winter residency of 2004 with an MFA in poetry, and currently teaches creative writing, adventure literature, and writing in the social sciences at Penn State University. Her new chapbook, Human Wilderness, was just released in late January 2024 from Finish Line Press. Amanda's current projects include working toward a new poetry collection tentatively titled Ecologies of the South, and she is now a contributing writer in the long-term Ecological Reflections project at Shavers Creek State Park in central Pennsylvania. Amanda's new chapbook, Human Wilderness, is available on all major platforms such as Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Thrift Books. A publisher's link to purchase the text is listed in the video description box. And this is my conversation with Mandy. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Not too shabby. I have got my new, I'm calling them my old people glasses. I just had to get progressive lenses, so I'm getting used to them. Trying to find out like where to look in them is a little off, but getting used to them slowly.
Know the feeling. New glasses are a difficult adjustment.
Definitely.
I've read your book. I love it. It's great.
Oh, thank you.
My favorite poem is Grief is a Haunting.
I've gotten that from a few different people, and I was surprised. Like, I liked it too, but that's one of the ones, like, I could never find a home for that poem anywhere. Like, it got rejected all the time, and I was starting to develop like a complex about that particular poem because of it.
That's their loss. And I think what makes it so easy to relate to is because of all the shit that we've gone through with the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so it resonates for a lot of people in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. I actually wrote that one not long after my grandmother had passed. So I had her in mind when I wrote it, but then I ended up revising it actually during the pandemic. So I'm not surprised that there's notes of that.
So what are you working on now, and what motivated the project?
There's actually two things that I'm working on now. One is originally I thought it was going to be another chapbook that I've already written. Like, I think it's about 37 or 38 poems. So I think I'm kind of looking at this as a first full poetry collection, tentatively called Ecologies of Self. I don't know what it is about that phrase, just really like it resonates with me. But the whole collection so far, I've been writing haibun, which is basically a prosometric form. So it takes lyric narrative, or what some people would refer to as prose poems, and then followed by a haiku. So all of the poems are following that format. At the end of the day, I'm not sure if in revision I will keep that format or end up like versing them all into lines or not. So in terms of a poetry project, that's what I'm working on now. It's right here on my desk. And then the other thing I've been working on is I'm now a contributing writer for the long-term Ecological Reflections project out at Shavers Creek. And I just got word actually about a month or so ago that I'm going to get to teach one of the first adventure lit classes for Penn State. So they're trying to bring that program back. And the vision I had for it and what I pitched is I wanted to do this long-term ecological reflections project out there with my students. So I kind of got the green light for that. We just have to work on some logistics. So the thing I've been mostly working on is going to Shavers Creek, trying to visit some of these sites, and then writing my reflections on location. So that's been kind of fun.
And you have a new chapbook out. So tell me a little bit about that and what motivated that project.
That chapbook was a long time coming. I used to have, and this is something I discuss with my creative writing students all the time, I used to have what I call a revision problem, where I could not leave a poem alone. I would revise them to death. And the result was that I would never send them out. I would never put them into a collection. And I just kind of woke up one day and I'm like, what am I doing? Because a lot of the poems I had actually written back in graduate school. And I remember one of my academic advisors at the time had told me, "Oh, I can't wait to see your work in print." And then unfortunately, he had passed away. And that was sort of the catalyst that, you know what, I wrote a lot of these poems under him. I want to see them in print just like he wanted to. So I ended up kind of just sending the poems out individually to different journals and see if there was a market for them that way. And then I just started to send out Human Wilderness. The poems, I guess, in terms of like theme, my niche is definitely nature writing. So you will notice that theme throughout, sort of this juxtaposition between like a longing almost, or like a wanting to be gum, part of the natural world that I love so much, and yet always having this human condition and this human element. When I was putting the collection together, another writer had pointed out that there was also sort of like this level of melancholy, not in a bad way, but I guess one that maybe an audience can connect with. And I think that you picked that up with one of the poems, that the haunting is a grief. So there's a little bit of like the grief there, a little bit of like longing and loss. And I think that in some cases that is still a part of that connection and longing that I'm looking for when I go into nature. It's like I want to be a part of it, but there's something that I'm always separate from it. And so I think that creates a little bit of that feeling of loss that sometimes people pick up on.
What have you learned about yourself through writing?
As a younger writer, I'm not one of those people that's going to shy away from age, by the way. I'm about 3 days shy of 45. But when I was in my 20s, kind of thinking about the age of a lot of my students, like I said, I had a problem with revision. So I've definitely learned over the years that one, you always save all your files and you label them. So if you end up over revising, you can go back and look at something that's more original. So I've really kind of grown as a writer where I still revise, but it's more like I just kind of put it away for a while. And then maybe months later, I come back to it. And it might be more of like, just maybe changing some lines, editing out some things where I'm like, you know what, the poem should have ended here, and I just kept going. So I've learned to sort of self-edit, I guess, a little bit more as I'm writing the poems. I've also noticed a thing about me as a writer, and maybe this will be comforting to some of your other writers out there, but so many of my colleagues, they set aside a certain time a day that they write, and they write every single day. And I used to feel a little bit of imposter syndrome because I'm like, how can I call myself a writer when I don't write every single day like that? So I definitely sort of write in bursts. And I think part of that is just the condition of teaching so many classes as well. Sometimes we get burnout as teachers. So I write in bursts, and then that gives me a little bit more time to think about what I'm putting on the page. Like I said, I almost have this built-in editor that I've developed over the years so that I don't run into that trap of editing a poem to death. And what I put on the page is now much closer to what you would see in a journal or in a chapbook.
What's the role or responsibility of writing for you? What keeps you generating material? Why write?
To me, writing is just like I have to do it, and I think a lot of writers will say that. What makes us writers is that like we have that compulsion to do it, and I've always been just a very creative person, so I have to have that creative outlet. I'm also neurodivergent, so I've just always been that way. So whether it's writing, I also play music, and I've recently gotten back into trying to get back into doing some art that's taking a little bit longer. So art for me, whether again that's writing or music, any of those other forms, it's like breathing. Like I can't necessarily live without that. So it's just something that I have to do. It goes beyond kind of like a passion. And I think that in terms of like what it means, maybe in a larger sense outside of myself, is I think good writing starts with close observation, and that's sort of what I do every day. I'm a very close observer. I like to record what I see and what I think and what I feel in the moment. So it's not so much that I'm trying to like create a message with the piece, but I like writing as an act of discovery. It's one of the reasons also, aside from poetry, that I really like creative nonfiction as well, because it kind of allows me to explore that avenue of learning what I'm trying to find out through the process of writing. And I think that's just a unique thing that comes with writing poetry or comes with writing lyric narrative that maybe you don't get in some of the other genres.
When you're struggling to write for whatever reason, what strategies do you use to get yourself back to the page?
So I am a nature writer. So my go-to is I have to get out there. I go to the woods, I climb a mountain, I go to a lake. And I also love photography. Actually, my background is one of my photos, and kind of move out of the way a little bit. And so when I'm out there, I often take photographs, and sometimes that's, a landscape shot like this. Sometimes I might take a close-up of a mushroom or just an acorn. And I love when I have writer's block after I've gone through, just that hike, kind of getting my mind back in a good spot. A couple of days later, I'll look on my phone or my PC, wherever I put those photos, and I kind of revisit them. And then I often see things that maybe I didn't see before, or it kind of jogs my memory. And so I often get inspired by the pictures that I take on those outings into nature. And I love doing that with my students as well, especially in spring semester. Unfortunately, I don't have a creative writing class, residential one this semester, but I love getting the students outside, just kind of get you out of that headspace and say, just soak it in. I don't want you to do any writing right away. Like, take 15 minutes. For me, it might be like an hour hike, and then come back, sit quietly and reflect and try to write down like anything that you can remember, use sensory details, but also how you felt. And I think that's a really kind of cool exercise to get yourself back into it when you have writer's block.
That sounds like a really wonderful activity. And I did something similar when I was teaching. I had this sort of scavenger hunt activity
Oh,
where
fun.
I would send the students out. It would take the entire class period and they would end in the library. So it was a kind of research activity. So I would ask them to go, they'd read something in the class that we had been reading. They'd read that poem 2 or 3 times. I'd send them out the door. They choose left or right. They start experiencing things in their environment. So find two people talking, listen to them, but don't involve yourself. Uh, Pull bits and pieces from that conversation, write them down that you find interesting. Now, where were you 5 years ago at this time? Remember that, write it down, and then send them on to the next location. Ultimately, they're going to end at the library, and then they go and they find a book on something they've never read, copy the passage or take out a book, go home and read that, record some things in their own notes. And then with all of these bits and pieces, they forge them together to create a poem. And this helps sort of get them out of that solitary element of creating a poem to create something new.
That sounds, I might steal or borrow that idea in the future. That sounds really neat.
I'll send it to you. I have one for in-person classes and then one for online. So you can do this both online and in person. So it doesn't matter what kind of class that you get. I'll send you both activities. One of them takes you through social media, but they still end in the library, but in the databases.
That sounds great. I'm always looking for new ideas like that, just to get out of the classroom. Not just the students need that, but sometimes I think we need that as well, right? Especially if you get stuck in a room that doesn't have windows or windows that don't open. It's like, let's get out of that headspace, do something fun and creative.
What revision strategy or strategies do you find most useful when revising your own work, and why? What problems or challenges do these activities help you solve?
So I'm a little old school. I carry around like a notebook with me, and I prefer to write all of my poems by hand. So, pen, paper. I rarely type a poem as I'm creating it. So my revision process begins on the page. Sometimes it's as I'm going, that self-editor will come in and I have, scribbles and scratches and strike throughs. And then other times, I have a bunch of little things in the margin. So as I'm writing the poem, I might have a thought and I'm like, you know what, that's not the right spot for that thought or that line, but I really like it. So I'll jot that down in the margins. And then the revision process for me really begins when I go in to type it up. And of course, I have documents within Word, for instance, like the new book that I'm working on. I'll go in there and I'll start putting a poem. So it's paginated and everything and ready to go. And that's really where I do a lot of my editing, from the pen to paper and then typing it up. Where when I sometimes see it on a screen, I'm like, if I'm doing a lined poem, I'm like, that line is twice as long as all the others. I need to edit that. So it could be something really simple like that. And then sometimes just getting that space between when I've written it by hand and when I go in to type it, I've gotten that distance and that objectivity, and then I'm able to begin editing a little bit. And that's sometimes where I might cut out a whole bunch of different lines and say, the poem needed to end here, or, the poem doesn't really begin until 5 lines in. I can scrap all of this other stuff. So it's a little bit of a roundabout way. I think a lot of people go right to their laptop or whatever they use, their tablet, and I'm kind of like a squirrel. Like, if you open the desk I have on campus, there's all these loose leaf like papers in there with like chicken scratching on it, and I kind of hoard them like a squirrel, and then I will take them out at a later time and say, now I'm ready to type this up. So I always kind of joke with my office mates, are like, your desk is like so nice, you have it decorated so nicely. And then I'll open the drawer and say, yeah, but look inside. This is like my revision pile. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
I think that's amazing. It's like a secret fire hazard.
It is. It's kind of like nice and shiny on the surface and a little chaotic underneath. So, it's like I'm both organized and disorganized with my writing process, I guess you could say. It looks like I have everything together on the surface, but underneath, it's just I have things everywhere. But it's like chaos with a purpose. I know where everything is at. It just, to the naked eye, it looks a little messy.
I do the exact same thing. There's just little bits of paper everywhere. I have a whole box, like a filing box, dedicated to the notes.
I should probably do something more practical like that instead of just opening the drawer and kind of tossing it in.
What is your favorite part of the writing process and why?
For me, I guess it's like the journey. Even if I haven't put the pen to paper yet, like I said, I will go into nature, go for a hike, or working on like this long-term ecological reflections project, like going to the site, doing the observation, kind of immersing myself in the subject. That's my favorite part. And then I would say my second favorite part is when I have sort of revised where I'm happy with it and I'm typing it up and I'm like, oh, that goes with this collection. And I kind of feel like this is done. Like, I've created something, I'm proud of it, I like where I've gone. So I'd say like the beginning and the end are my favorite, and kind of like all the work to get there in between. Not that I don't enjoy that, but I guess it's a little less enjoyable than the process to get from A to B.
Do you have different processes for different forms of writing that you're doing, whether it's a poem or nonfiction piece or even a song?
I guess in some ways that like it's always like a moment of inspiration. That's often the spark for that. Whether, like I said, I'm on a hike could be the inspiration. If I'm doing like one of these long-term reflections, it could be like writing almost like a stream of consciousness on the spot. So I guess I have a lot of different techniques, but I don't like categorize one technique for one genre or one method. Like I said, I guess it's kind of like the chaotic with a purpose. So I don't have like a rigid schedule or a regimented system that I use. I just start. And I guess one analogy that I could use is, my bandmates, for instance, they're always amazed that I can read music, right? Because they don't, and I do. And they're like, how can you look at this like complicated dots and dashes and lines and look at that and know what to do? And I said, well, it's kind of like reading a book, right? So if you open a book, you don't say like like, is that an article? B, that's a verb. Like, you don't think about what you're reading, you just kind of read it. And that's kind of what I do with music. And I guess it's sort of the same thing with writing. I just have to do it. If I overanalyze what I'm doing, then I kind of get stuck, and that's when writer's block can really kick in. So, I guess I like to do a little bit of stream of consciousness writing if there is any set pattern, and do a little bit of that first. And then usually it's maybe a phrase or an idea or an image that really sticks with me. And I kind of take that and then I start building the work around that.
Like scaffolding.
Yeah, exactly.
What reading suggestions do you have? What authors do you keep in your back pocket and why?
This is almost like asking me what my favorite band is or what my favorite song is. I don't necessarily have an answer. I have a bookshelf over here to my right, and if I just kind of look at it, I guess a lot of the writing that I'm kind of drawn to is definitely more lyrical in nature. So, my poetry tends to be lyrical. Even my prose is very lyrical, and I like kind of going back kind of to the beginning. So if someone was looking for something like more classical in terms of literature, I love reading Thoreau. I love reading Emerson, right? So I like reading kind of like the transcendentalist type stuff. It's kind of in tune with who I am as someone who likes to go into nature and then kind of brings in this reflective element. And then I was reading, I forgot to pull it off the shelf. I think it is... Yeah, by W.S. Merwin. I've been reading some of his writing lately. Right now, just because I'm getting ready to put this adventure lit class together, I've been reading 2 books in particular, and you're probably not going to be able to see that. They're going to be backwards on the screen, right? But one is called Women Who Run with the Wolves. I'll kind of put it in the middle so you can kind of see it. And this book is by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. It's called Contacting the Power of the Wild Woman. So it's like a lot of like poems, there's some essays, some reflections, there's folklore in it, which is kind of really cool. And then the other book that I have been reading, and again, I'm sorry it's backwards on the screen. It's still in the cellophane wrapping too, so it's nice and shiny. And this book is called Reading Shavers Creek. And this is actually the book that I'm probably going to use for a textbook. And this was edited by Ian Marshall. He's the one who started the Ecological Reflections Project out at Shavers Creek about 10 years ago. And so this is a compilation of about the first decade, I guess you could say, of sort of the best of essays. And on Shavers Creek website, if you go there and in the search bar, if you put in Creek Journals, that's where he got all of the pieces for this collection. And so I've also been kind of going through and reading the Creek Journals that other writers have written. And it's really neat because you have poets like Todd Davis, right? So his ecological reflections are in poem form, right? And then you have a number of, say, like biologists who have gone out, and it's a mix of almost like an educational or informative essay, but a little bit with the creative nonfiction mixed in, and then a bunch of different lyrical pieces as well. So I've been really trying to get back to like the nature writing roots. And like I said, that starts with like the classics, the old sort of American literature from the 1800s, and then reading some of like the more modern works that some of our colleagues at Penn State were involved with these Creek Journals as well. So getting to know them and their work a little bit better has been nice. So it's all more or less, aside from a few people that they brought in from maybe the West or New England, it's a lot of local writers. So I've just been really into local writers lately. Another one would be Dave Bonta. I've been reading a couple of his books, especially since I've been writing the haibun. He's the one who got me interested in that. He writes a lot of modern haiku, and so I'm just really interested in that kind of simplistic form right now.
Thank you for making time for me. I have learned so much, and I can't wait to check out these authors.
Yeah, no problem. I love them. Definitely, you could, for free, check out that Shavers Creek website and look at the Creek Journals. Just some really neat nature writing going on there.